Picture this: a baby born into Hollywood royalty stars in her first commercial before she's even a year old. By 7, she's a household name, but she's also pouring whiskey over her desserts. By 11, she's already battling alcohol addiction, and by 13, she's institutionalized after a string of reckless decisions. A year later, she's legally separated from her parents. It sounds like a Hollywood script, almost too unbelievable. But this isn't fiction. It's the real story of Drew Barrymore, whose family history is just as tragic. Born into a dynasty of actors with a dark legacy of addiction, Drew's childhood was marked by trauma, neglect, and the destructive influence of her parents. This isn't just a tale of fame. It's a story of survival in a family plagued by addiction and chaos. But before we dive into it, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more stories of your favorite stars. Drew Barrymore was born into Hollywood's most famous acting dynasty, the Barrymores. Her family tree is rooted deep in the world of showbiz, with generations of actors before her. But the Barrymore name, while iconic, came with a dark shadow. Alongside talent, the family struggled with addiction, most notably alcohol. Both Drew's grandfather and father succumbed to alcohol-related issues, a curse that would come to haunt Drew at a devastatingly early age. Drew's father, John Drew Barrymore, was known for his own promising career, but his talent was quickly overshadowed by his battle with addiction. He was erratic, unreliable, and dangerous, leading to a toxic home environment. When Drew's mother, Jade Barrymore, became pregnant, the situation turned violent. John's behavior spiraled out of control, forcing Jade to make a difficult decision. She left him for good to protect herself and her unborn child. John Drew Barrymore's absence left a painful void in Drew's life. Though she had never known her father to be a steady figure, the emotional impact of his abandonment would scar her for years to come. Drew struggled to reconcile her father's decision to prioritize his addictions over being part of her life. This sense of abandonment, coupled with the destructive behaviors she witnessed from those around her, would set the stage for her own battles with addiction and mental health. After leaving John, Jade Barrymore was left to raise Drew alone. But Jade, while well-meaning in many ways, wasn't prepared to be the type of mother Drew desperately needed. The Hollywood scene became Jade's escape, a way to cope with the single-parent life, the financial strain, and perhaps the pain of her own failed relationship. Unfortunately, this meant dragging young Drew along into environments that no child should have been in. By the age of 7, Drew wasn't just a star on the rise thanks to her role in E.T. She was also becoming a regular at adult Hollywood parties. A child. In Hollywood parties. Jade took Drew with her to nightclubs and elite gatherings, exposing her daughter to the very world of excess that had already destroyed so many lives in her family. Instead of a normal childhood filled with school, friends, and playtime, Drew found herself surrounded by adults, some of whom were quick to encourage her wild behavior. What began as sips of alcohol at parties quickly turned into full-blown drinking sessions. Guests at these events would dare the young actress to drink, treating her addiction like a game. Drew, eager to fit in and desperate for attention, complied. By the time she was 9, she was drinking regularly, and by 10, she was already experimenting with drugs. Drew's childhood was over before it had even truly begun, and her mother, rather than intervening, was complicit in this dangerous lifestyle. Buckle up, because we are now diving deeper into the darker times. By the time she was 12, Drew's drinking had turned into a full-fledged addiction. Alcohol was no longer enough to numb the pain of her broken family life and chaotic upbringing, so she began experimenting with more dangerous substances. This led to a downward spiral that threatened to consume her entirely. In interviews, Drew would later reflect on her teenage years as a time of deep confusion and emotional turmoil. "When you do drugs, your problems in normal life just seem so much bigger," she once said. "You kind of do more to get away from them." It was a vicious cycle, one that Drew found herself caught in with no clear way out. At the height of her fame, Hollywood had turned its back on her, branding her as an unreliable and troubled star. Her once promising career was fading, but worse than that, her mental and physical health were rapidly deteriorating. Drew was no longer just a child star. She was becoming a tragic figure, much like her father before her. By the time Drew was 13, the weight of her addictions and emotional trauma became unbearable. She had spent years trying to escape the pain of her father's abandonment, her mother's neglect, and the pressures of fame, but nothing seemed to work. Drew's breaking point came in the form of a suicide attempt, a moment that would forever change the course of her life. After a heated argument with her mother, Drew felt there was no way out of the chaos that had consumed her. She desperately attempted to end her life. Her cry for help was loud and clear, but at the time, it was dismissed by many as teenage rebellion or attention-seeking behavior. The incident shocked those around her, but instead of getting the support she needed, Drew was sent to a mental institution. Her mother, overwhelmed by Drew's increasingly erratic behavior, made the difficult decision to have her daughter institutionalized. For the next 18 months, Drew would be locked away, battling her demons in isolation, with only occasional visits from Jade. The institutionalization was a harsh wake-up call, but it was also a pivotal moment in Drew's life. It forced her to confront her addictions head-on and begin the long journey toward recovery. At 14, Drew made the boldest decision of her life. She legally emancipated herself from her mother. This was suggested by institution staff as a way for Drew to establish a stable life on her own. The relationship that had been a source of both pain and comfort was now too fractured to repair. Jade, who had once been Drew's companion in Hollywood's wild party scene, was now seen as part of the problem, a parent who had failed to protect her child from the dangers of fame and addiction. For Drew, emancipation was her only chance to take control of her life. The emancipation was finalized in court, where the judge reminded Drew that while he could legally make her an adult, he couldn't reverse that decision once made, and her mother was supportive of it as well. On the day of my hearing, my mother was there in full support of my emancipation, which would mean me living on my own. I felt so sad, but too much had happened, she recalled. But while legal emancipation freed Drew from her mother's influence, it also left her more alone than ever. At 14, she was suddenly responsible for herself, navigating adulthood long before she was ready. She moved into her own apartment, but the freedom she had longed for came with its own set of challenges. Drew struggled financially, taking on odd jobs just to make ends meet. At one point, she was cleaning toilets to survive, a far cry from the glamorous Hollywood life she had once known. Despite the hardship, Drew was beginning to take charge of her own destiny. But the road to recovery would be long, and Hollywood was not ready to welcome her back with open arms just yet. By the age of 14, Drew Barrymore had already packed an entire lifetime of heartbreak, struggle, and survival into a childhood that barely even existed. From her early days as a child star to facing addiction, abandonment, and institutionalization, Drew's life had been a roller coaster of experiences that would break most adults. She'd endured it all while Hollywood watched, and by the time she legally emancipated herself from her mother, she'd been through more than many would in a lifetime. Despite the pain, Drew knew that if she was to move forward, she'd have to confront the wounds left by her parents. In her journey to healing, she began the difficult process of forgiveness as she entered her 30s. Drew's relationship with her mother, Jade, had been strained for years. After her emancipation, the two barely spoke. But with time, Drew came to understand that her mother's decisions. In a remarkable display of maturity and self-awareness, Drew chose to forgive her mother, recognizing that holding on to anger and resentment would only keep her trapped in the past. Her relationship with her father, John Drew Barrymore, was even more complicated. He had been absent for most of her life, consumed by his own battles with addiction. Despite this, Drew longed for a connection with him. When he was diagnosed with cancer in the early 2000s, Drew stepped in to take care of him, paying for his treatment and ensuring he was comfortable in his final days. Though they had never had a traditional father-daughter relationship, Drew found peace in knowing she had done everything she could to be there for him at the end. Drew Barrymore's road to redemption wasn't easy. After years of battling addiction and being blacklisted by Hollywood, she was seen as a liability. But Drew refused to fade away. Her big breakthrough came in 1996 with Scream, where she delivered a memorable performance in the film's iconic opening scene. This role reminded the world that Drew Barrymore was not just a child star gone awry. She was a talented actress with staying power. Drew also co-founded her own production company, Flower Films, with partner Nancy Javonen. She produced and starred in some of the most beloved films of the late 90s and early 2000s, including Never Been Kissed and Charlie's Angels. Her production company gave her the power to shape her own destiny in Hollywood, transforming her from a fallen star into a powerhouse both in front of and behind the camera. Drew Barrymore didn't let her tragic past define her. She used it as fuel to create a brighter future. Today, she stands as an inspiration to anyone who has ever struggled, showing us all that it's possible to reclaim your life and turn your pain into power. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories from Hollywood and beyond.